Video game, movies, and TV shows. In many ways, they are kind of the holy grail of media, as who wouldn't want to convert a massively successful game IP into some kind of on-film experience? The problem is, though, that a majority of these video game adaptations really just suck. I'm sure off the top of your head right now, you could name a few of these video game adapted shows and movies that just were, well, not great. However, in February 2023, HBO debuted what might have been one of the best video game adaptations to film of all time, The Last of Us. The Last of Us is a post-apocalyptic adventure horror game which follows the story of Joel and Ellie as they try to survive in this mushroom zombie post-apocalyptic world. The Last of Us video game is one of those games that's held in super high regards in a lot of online spaces. Developed by Naughty Dog Entertainment and released in 2013, The Last of Us video game made major waves at the time of its release. Critics, YouTubers, and average players alike all praising the game for its immersive world, heart-pumping gameplay, and tear-wrenching story. The game going on to sell over 20 million units as of October 2019, a number that I imagine has continued to climb, especially since the release this year of The Last of Us show. So to say that HBO was taking a bit of a risk in developing one of the most beloved video games of the last 10 years into a full-blown streaming series is maybe an understatement. As I said earlier, The Last of Us is set in this post-pandemic zombie apocalyptic world where mushrooms known as cordyceps have adapted to be able to take over and control human minds, transforming them into these mindless, violent, zombie-like creatures that can spread their contagion with just one bite. As we said earlier, The Last of Us follows the story of Joel, a man who before the zombie pandemic was just an ordinary guy trying to survive in this world as best he can and provide for his young daughter, Sarah. Suddenly, though, everything changes for Joel as a group of mind-controlling mushrooms known as cordyceps have mutated, infecting humans around the world as society begins to crumble. Joel is forced to watch his daughter die in his arms amongst the chaos of this zombie apocalypse. 20 years later, and Joel is a changed man. The post-apocalyptic world and the loss of his daughter has made him violent, as he and his brother Tommy have been forced to make do-or-die decisions over these many years. At this time, Joel and his brother have set up camp in Boston, as the city has managed to survive and be quarantined. Joel frequently working as a smuggler with his partner Tess. Joel's new life, though, changes once again when he and Tess accept a job from a freedom fighter group known as the Fireflies to transport this angsty teenage girl, Ellie, across America to another one of their facilities. Here begins the primary narrative story of The Last of Us, the video game balancing sneaking through zombies and getting into shootouts with this growing relationship between Joel and Ellie. Ellie, you see, is special. She is immune to these cordyceps and thus is the possible key to finding a cure for all of humanity. Over the series, we see Joel and Ellie's relationship begin to change. As I said earlier, Joel, after the death of his daughter Sarah, has become a cold, violent, closed-off man that refuses to interact with Ellie really at all, as she reminds him of his daughter, Sarah. While Ellie herself is a stubborn teenager who really trusts no one, as she was raised her entire life in the quarantine zone as an orphan. Her entire life, she's had people abandon her, and she's had to look out for herself. Joel and Ellie together must overcome the insanity of this world, facing hordes of killer zombies, terrifying monstrosities like the clickers, and possibly the scariest thing of them all, their fellow humans. HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us largely focuses on this narrative story and the relationship growth between Joel and Ellie, and I really have to give them credit where credit's due. They do all of this quite beautifully. Many scenes throughout The Last of Us adaptation are taken almost directly from the video game, yet at the same time, while the showrunners were loyal to the story, they also weren't afraid to make some changes. The most striking difference I think you will see in The Last of Us adaptation when you compare it to the video game is the use of the many flashback scenes, the majority of which were not in the video game at all. The most notable of these flashbacks coming in episode 3, Long Time, where almost the entirety of the episode is a flashback, Joel and Ellie barely featuring at all. These flashbacks, in my opinion, help further engross the audience in this crazy world, while also further fleshing out characters that didn't receive much screen time in the video game. As we said earlier, The Last of Us combines these heart-wrenching human stories, real human emotions, with action, horror, and violence. While it is a story about a zombie pandemic, at its core, though, it's really a story about people trying to survive in a cold, lonely world. Truly, I do think that this is one of the best video game film adaptations ever made. Even still, though, the show does have some issues. HBO's The Last of Us suffers from many of the same mistakes and shortcomings that its fellow video game adaptations before it have made. While focusing on the heart-wrenching narrative story that lies within The Last of Us, the show itself kind of struggles to capture one of the most inherent things in video games: the gameplay. One of the things that made The Last of Us game so good was its ability to break the game down between cutscenes and gameplay. The cinematics themselves in the world, majority of the time, are playable. Much of the dialogue between characters comes as you're traversing this post-apocalyptic world, Joel and Ellie carrying on with conversations as you're exploring the many areas. Regularly, the game shows character growth in depth outside of the cutscenes themselves, one of the most obvious of which coming when Joel finally realizes that he cares for Ellie as a father, as he saves her from a town of cannibals. When adapting this game, though, HBO avoids large sections of gameplay from The Last of Us, oftentimes reducing these gameplay segments to just mere minutes of screen time, with the most extended sequence of gameplay section in the show coming in episode 2 with the museum scene. Don't get me wrong, I love and enjoy HBO's shift to this more narrative focus, the more narrative focus of the story of The Last of Us, but I have to say that I did think that HBO missed out on sidestepping the game's mini shootouts, stealth sections, and really the thing that you do the majority of The Last of Us: walking. As I said earlier, episode 2, Infected, is probably the most notable exception to this, as Ellie and Joel and Tess explore an overgrown and run-down Boston. The scene allows for the characters' dialogue to be natural as the three explore, ultimately climaxing in this museum scene where Ellie comes face to face for a clicker for the first time. This episode and these scenes, really greater than any other, really capture the horror element of The Last of Us, and possibly one of the most obvious reasons why it was taken directly from the game. The show, though, instead took mainly focus on much of the narrative aspects, but I think in doing so, they missed some of the most intense moments from The Last of Us, the moments that happened during the gameplay. There are glimpses of Joel's violence in the show, but it's kind of nothing compared to the violence that we see Joel do in The Last of Us game, where we, the player, are made to feel this violence from the man ourselves, as we are the ones who constantly pull the trigger over and over again. This kind of necessarily shifts the dynamic between Ellie and Joel, as now we no longer see Ellie and Joel bond through the trauma and violence that Joel puts into the world. It kind of effectively speeds up the pace that Joel warms up to Ellie, which we very much see play out in the show in around episode 4 or 5, where Joel suddenly kind of has a change of heart and a shift of personality in how he interacts with Ellie. Overall, The Last of Us show does an amazing job capturing the relationship between Joel and Ellie and the story of how these two most unlikely of people really came to care so deeply for one another. I admire that the showrunners weren't afraid to make changes to the show and the game, and personally I enjoyed a majority of the flashback scenes added throughout the show, as it did feel like they gave us greater context in the world that we were experiencing. Adapting a video game into television media is not an easy feat at all. It's literally almost impossible to capture the same feeling that a video game gives us purely in the visual form of a television show. While I have to say I was semi-disappointed that The Last of Us show filtered out many of the gameplay moments and sequences that I think further capture the essence of Joel's violence and its impact on Ellie and thus the impact on their relationship. I will give HBO's The Last of Us, though, its due. This show was one of the most ambitious and well-done video game adaptations probably ever. I mean, really look no farther than the Halo TV series that came out earlier last year to see how badly the Last of Us adaptation could have gone. If I have to give it a score, I'd probably give HBO's The Last of Us an 8.9 out of 10. Overall, I think it does an amazing job of capturing the essence of the story of Joel and Ellie and their growth and their relationship with one another. Really, this journey of two broken people who together finally find some inner peace in this hellhole of a world known as The Last of Us. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video or learned something new, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of Season 1 of The Last of Us, the HBO adaptation. Did you think it was good? Did you think that there were some problems? What would you change about the show? And are you excited for the next season of The Last of Us? As always, guys, if you did enjoy the video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. Make sure you go check out some of our other Last of Us content as well as our many other media reviews. As always, I hope to see you in the next one. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace, love, adieu.
Story that might be, we wasn't supposed to happen. So much talk around us, we became numb to the yapping. It was like 05, got my license to drive. Picked you up in my pop's car, went for a ride. Couldn't no one tell us nothing.